Yeah, really excited to kick into this. This is the first Ask the Judges session that we have at AMAA, which is the Alberta Marching Arts Association. We're a new circuit that is growing up in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. We have had the pleasure that we have gotten to work with MEPA, and we've stood up a partnership through Heather Graham, who's the Vice President of Color Guard. And Heather had offered that with Keith and Kent that we might be able to do a session like this. So maybe Heather, anything you have to say to introduce us?
Introduce us as a unit.
Yes.
Keith is a valued human in many organizations, as is Kent, and they have a high degree of knowledge, and they are a powerful sibling duo with a lot of experience in color guard, winds, and percussion. So we did these for the MEPA circuit too, and they were really valuable, and they have a lot of valuable information to share. So I think just giving access to every little part that we can to others is helpful.
That's awesome, and really appreciate MEPA and Keith and Kent and Heather for helping us out with this. I thought just asking a few warm-up questions that I know are on folks' mind as we sort of canvassed our group to see what would be really relevant for people. Just as one, and this is just a starter one before we get into some technical questions. And I know you're both active in many different types of circuits, but as we're just starting up our circuit up here in Canada, from a judging perspective, what would your advice be, not only to the circuit, but also to our judges and our instructors? Like, how should we think about this as this all starts to come together over time? Maybe over to you first, Keith.
Yeah, for our new circuit, it's a partnership. And I'm going to say a lot of obvious things, and I think that that's good. But the judging community, the instruction community, and the students exist in a partnership because we all want the performers to get better over time. If we're all in this for the kids. In fact, as judges, we are super fans for everything the performers are doing. And so I hope that everyone can see that there is no adversarial role anywhere in the system, that we're all working towards the same goal. And for the judging community, it's critical that people are able to articulate their recognition skills. The greatest skill that a judge can bring to a circuit, especially a new one, where people are finding this, are discovering the standards together, is the recognition skills. And the skills levels themselves have been more clearly identified this year and defined on the sheets, and we can talk about that later.
Yeah, no circuit exists in the dark. We all exist in partnerships with other circuits as well. Even as you discover together how you're going to frame your educational system, just remember that there are partnerships everywhere. Look for answers. There are industry standards that we all hold ourselves to. So find out what those are. If your instructors seem to be in a vacuum or a bubble, and nobody has to teach alone, find somebody with another group and say, tell me what you think. So everybody should want to work together.
That's awesome, and I appreciate industry standard definitely resonates with me. And yeah, we don't have to invent everything on our own up here, and we definitely should not. And so looking to others to understand what that industry standard is makes a lot of sense. So as folks are trickling in, these are primarily instructors who are at different units on our circuit, and so wanted to get into some more technical questions, and folks, I'll probably ask two and then start to open it up and get folks to chime in as well. But the first question I have is, I've never really understood exactly what design analysis is. And so would love some help in trying to understand that more.
It's fantastic that you asked that, because we are both DA people naturally. And this year, WGI has introduced a word on all the sheets called craftsmanship, which is directly related to how we view the DA sheet. I'll let Keith speak to that.
Well, the design analysis sheet is the one sheet that gets to talk about everything at the same time. We get to talk about equipment and movement through space. We get to talk about the body and the blending of body and equipment and the transitions. Like everything that we see is in play for the design analysis judge. You can think of design analysis as an evaluation of not only the connective tissue between the phrases, but the quality of the phrases themselves. In fact, the design analysis sheet is one of the very few that gets to talk about how the show is built and the degree of success of that build. In fact, the design analysis sheet, like the downstairs sheets, is an achievement sheet. So we consider the degree of success of simultaneous responsibilities. So the DA person is watching everything at once, and I'll admit, it's work.
Right. Your show is a blueprint, and we analyze that blueprint. We're an analysis caption, like the downstairs captions, whereas equipment only focuses on equipment and its relationship to movement, and movement does the same thing in reverse. We do have the entire blueprint available to us, and it's important that we judge not just events that happen, but over time. We judge the components of your show and how those components fit together.
And
we make value judgments on your choices.
And we consider the logic of the show and the development of logic over time. If you introduce elements early in the show and they seem to establish a standard or a reference point, we expect to see them referenced later in the show.
Detail and nuance. It's on the sheet.
So we will, like if you have your performers doing individual things in gradations of chronology, not all at the same time, but at different times, we will catalog that away and compare earlier performance elements to later performance elements, which is honestly pretty cool when you think on that level over time.
Does that answer any of your questions? And hopefully you'll raise more questions that we can answer.
It does raise a question in my mind, and definitely others can chime in as well. But let's say I'm, a quarter of the way through my season and I'm not happy with where I'm scoring on design analysis. What can I do over the next 3 quarters to try to improve it?
Make your show logical. A lot of people they write what they like. I always tell people don't fall in love with your product, because your product can feel like an extension of you. And we have negative comments from time to time about your show, and they are not comments about you. Be willing to change what you're doing to create a more logical and artistic product.
And there are times where I've told units the worst thing that could happen is you leave the critique and change everything you're doing, because only the designer has a vision that is being implemented. And as a judge who sees it 1 or 2 times, we don't know what the vision is. We will try to help you bring that vision to life. And so the question is, how can you get from where you are to where you want to be? And that's why we do critiques, because we want to help you achieve that vision. And if the score is not where you want it to be, then it's possible that we can't design the show for you. We can't suggest corrections, but we can tell you where the lack of logic lies. And it's okay to record critiques.
And take notes in a notebook.
Yep.
Imagine 5 people standing around a car. The equipment judge basically looks under the hood and sees how things work.
Yeah.
The body judge, or the movement judge, looks at the body of the car and sees how beautiful it is. The GE judges love to hear how loud the muffler is. They're really turned on by that. But DA opens the door, gets in the glove box, and pulls out the book about your car, and we read through that. It's a car repair manual of a caption.
Yeah, that's a really interesting analogy. Maybe
I don't know if it's helpful if you can't hear me, but I'm wondering about like when it is within your circuit that design analysis is maybe something that you are putting to the side necessarily. Like if we're looking at equipment or general effect, especially if we have, let's say in our world, 3 hours of rehearsal, Is design analysis going to make or break a score coming into finals if we're, let's say in prelims, wanting to make a big change to what it is that we're doing and how we're perceiving or like trying to interpret our show to someone who's looking at design analysis?
So there's a word I said earlier, and it's success. The design analysis judge considers the degree of success. If something new is rough and not successful, it will not be beneficial. The most beneficial advice I often give units is that if you can simplify what you're doing and match the training to the performance, you're going to be better by doing less.
It's rough being somebody who's writing a show and also being the trainer who's writing the vocabulary, because you see things from the floor instead of from the top. Consider, do you create storyboards before you write your show? Do you have an idea of the pacing? How many places in the floor you will occupy? What those densities look like? How many sections are segmented? Like, these questions have to be answered as you envision your show, not while you're teaching it. So remember, the form is evidence of planning. Just make sure your form is in place before you teach.
Thank you so much.
Just in a little bit of a different direction. So let's say I'm a new instructor or a newer instructor, and I'm listening to the judges' tapes. What should I be listening for? And then what should I be doing with that information?
Good question. That's our commentary is supposed to be scoring significant, which means we're using the words on the sheets and we're using the indicators of box thirds. So I have a sheet in front of me, and if you have a category that is often evident, that is that has sound logic, words like good, excellent, sound, and comprehensive or broad exist in certain places on the sheet. And what we're trying to communicate to you in the use of those words is what your scoring range is. And so our scoring range should match the language that we've used. Every word that we speak is supposed to indicate a scoring category. And over time, we'll talk about different elements of the show that lie in different scoring categories, and then we'll create an aggregate score for those elements. So when you listen to the judge's commentary, you can find descriptor words that offer an insight into the vulnerable portions of the show. If we use moderate for a certain skill, that's when you're probably going to want to work on. Because if we say that other things are good, it's good.
Scoring is driven by commentary. So at the end of a tape, you should have an idea of where your score is going to be, because we use words like frequently, which is a box 4 word. If we use the language, and we have tools for this. We have what's called a color bloom, which has qualitative terms around a circle, so that we can use a variety of signifiers for what box your score is going to land in. And oftentimes, because on DA in particular, we talk about so many things, these may exist in, say, box 3 and box 4. But just pay attention to the language on the tape and take notes. You will have questions. Don't try to remember them. Write them down. I know you're trying to load your floor while you're listening to tapes. I know it can be tough with the time constraints.
Yeah, and I think we can always break it up within staff members as well, depending on how many staff members you have present. Even people who, I don't know why, I'm just in and out of focus, close and far. But I think the worst thing to go into critique and say is, what'd you think of the show? Because it's like, well, we gave you a 5-minute commentary piece of what we thought of the show. Like, even if you can only listen to the 30-second or a minute long recaps, that's so important to be able to comprehend what they thought of your show and where you could start the conversation with that judge, versus they've seen, 20 units in a day. They're not going to remember every little intricacy. And also speaking to your own strengths of your group and what you'd like them, since you do have people who are judging the same groups often throughout the circuit, week after week. It's like, speak to your strengths, speak to the things that you know you're going to work on or that you may adjust, but like also articulate what you'd like them to see more, or maybe something that they had missed throughout the production when they only got to see it one time.
Especially if you have a fixed judge pool, it is completely valid to say, we have a skill we've been developing and you didn't mention it. We'd like you to comment on it next time. It's completely valid, because this is a two-way street. We're learning about you as you're learning about us, and we're developing an understanding of show as you're introducing it to us.
Just anyone feel free to jump in if there's additional questions or follow on.
I just thought that whole thing was really helpful. I think critique for us here is really different than what I've experienced at WGI, and just knowing what to come in and prepare for, and just knowing that you can also help drive that conversation, and then also have the autonomy to really just say a lot about your unit and what it is that you want to see. I find that incredibly helpful. So thank you for those notes on that.
A judging critique should be listening first, because you are where information lies for us. We've already given it to you in our commentary, and it's your nickel. You can say what you want. Advocate for your team.
It's okay to feel emotions too. When sometimes people come in and they have big emotions, and you should. We all care about this. We've been where you are, and we, as judges, we just need to remember that the instructional community are in fact advocates for their performers, and that comes with an emotional response, and that's okay.
Let's remember that the numbers that are given also tell a story. There's a profile we develop between the what and the how on any given caption, as well as the distance of those numbers from the team above you and the team below you. That profile gives you a sense of who you're neighbors with. It gives you an impression of what we thought of you. So don't focus on the number, especially the bottom line number, because we don't judge a bottom line number. We judge two shows at once, the what and the how. The bottom line number is simply an amalgam of those two.
And there have been some misunderstandings about what the relationship between those two subcaptions means. There are let me talk about both of those sides.
We could talk about profiling all day.
Oh yeah. If the performance itself, the quality of the performance is placed in a lower number than the written work, the repertoire, the vocabulary, that means often that you haven't mastered it yet. And that seems rational. But often you'll find that a judge will put the performers over the written work. And can that mean that the performers have mastered the work? It can mean that, but it can mean a lot of things. We are allowed, as judges, I work with WGI, and the WGI standards say that we have a variety of rationale for doing that. It might be an indication that you have a design vulnerability and there are limitations in your vocabulary or repertoire, and that your performers are better than the design. And that's something that a judge should talk about. If you ever find that you get an ordinal for performance that's better than design, by all means, ask the judge what that means. It might be like in a crowded neighborhood, it might be a way to solve a scoring dilemma. That's the last valid use of it. But it could indicate an unfinished show at the beginning of the season. If you've only got a minute on the floor, the performers might score above the written work. So there's a lot of reasons why those numbers might be above or below each other.
When
it would not be weird.
Ask a judge, this is a good point. If you don't understand what we mean by profile or ordinal, like if any of these words don't mean something to you, ask now, because this is kind of a weird language we've developed.
Yeah, explain it to us. Tell us.
Pick one.
Profile.
A profile is the relationship between the two subcaption numbers. A spread is the distance between the two subcaption numbers. An ordinal is a placement of the subcaption number in the range of subcaption numbers given in that show.
Let's consider that we're asked to both rank and rate. The ranking is the ordinal. The rating is the number.
In fact, we have 4 responsibilities as a judge simultaneously. We are ranking, we are indicating a profile, we are developing a spread, and we are rating. And those are our priorities in that order. I saw a chat.
Ozzy's asking for a translator.
Well,
Is there a vocab definition list anywhere? So yeah, how do people, what's the best way, I guess, to become fluent in the language that judges use as an instructor?
Heather was right. Kent and I have an unfair advantage. We would be having this conversation on a Wednesday night with or without your circuit. This is what we talk about with one another constantly, and with our training partners. There's rarely a week that goes by where we don't spend time talking about these issues. And like with any language, you develop it by using it. Find a training partner. Find someone with whom you can have a conversation about these topics. It has been critical for our development and our success to have other people who've invested in us. That's why we are eager to invest in you.
And a lot of the verbiage that judges use throughout shows are the verbiage right from the sheets, because they are trying to pull those words to make where they're placing you valid and validate why they put you where they think you belong. So reading the sheets and taking notes and highlighting those sheets is helpful. Printing them out and having a hard copy to reference as well is helpful.
Does your circuit have access to the WGI manual? And has it been sent to all the instructional all the teams? That it would be helpful, because there are times where we will read from the philosophy. And one of the most harsh sentences that I say on design analysis is that this is a moment of irrelevance. And it's possible you don't know what that means if you haven't looked through the manual and found that paragraph. It means that it doesn't have a connection with what came before and what came after it. It's just a moment of color guard with no logical connection to the other elements in the show.
And as you find training partners that are comfortable for you, remember, they don't have to be color guard people. I'm a professional, I'm a composer. That's what I do for a living. I played horn with the Peoria Symphony Orchestra and the United States Air Force Band. I'm a musician by trade, but we got into guard early on. Keith's a historian. Like, we have artistic endeavors that transcend this activity. Talk to people about that. You'll get a different artistic take on a lot of what we're supposed to be talking about.
Among our judging community, we have the former artist in residence at the Corning Museum of Glass. We have Stephen Bruckner. We have people who are professional painters who make their full-time living painting. We have architects. We have doctors. Like, every one of us brings a background into judging that is somewhat unique. And we all draw upon our experiences. And so it's essential that you find a broad spectrum of people to help you broaden your horizons. And the context of color guard can come from anywhere.
That's exciting. I think that's what we're trying to do here by having this conversation and then sharing it with the rest of the circuit, with both of you, which is really exciting. I don't want to monopolize if anyone else has any questions, but I've got a list of 20, so I can keep going.
I don't know if this is a question that can be answered maybe specifically from like a judge's standpoint, but a lot of what we see on our circuit is just uncertainty as to where to put their units in terms of classification. So people generally, because we are a smaller circuit, we have people who say, I may not want to compete against so-and-so, I'm going to move into said category. Or, where are you going this year? I might go somewhere else, where that kind of just takes away from the spirit of competition. So I'm just wondering if there's any perspective as we're going into designing our shows or moving into our competition season, how we might identify what class or unit classification we should be entering.
Well,
it is true.
Do you self-categorize?
Yeah.
Do you put yourself in the classes yourself?
Yes.
So the standards for classes has been better defined this year by WGI. I pulled out some old sheets, and open class used to be intermediate to advanced, and the new definitions. Heather, did you share that presentation I created with them?
Yes, and
Okay.
and their classes are relative to WGI. They kind of have different names. What is the highest class? Is it still open class?
We do a premier, which would be like a world class, and then advanced class would be the next level down below that.
So I'll tell you what the WGI definitions are. Regional A is a beginning classification. They are introductory skills. The A class, as of this year, are intermediate skills. Intermediate used to be open, but now the reality is, if you look at A classes across the full spectrum of the Guard activity, there are some incredible A performers who are far beyond introductory. And we're realizing and recognizing what has become the reality in WGI, which is that A class is at least intermediate skills. The open class is advanced skills, and world class is virtuosic and standard setting. Those are the new definitions. And as judges, we anticipate seeing a level of training that matches the expectation of the class descriptor. And so it is valid for the judge to talk about to what degree does the unit meet the expectation of the classification. And if you have local classes that have local definitions, then it's valid for the judge to know and look for the metrics through which the units meet those definitions.
And the Alberta circuit is a little different too, considering like most, if not all, are not relative to a school. They're relative to an independent organization where they come together, and a lot of it is based off of age and grade level. So I think that's where it comes a challenge too, is just like everybody kind of gets a different pool of individuals based on the year and just the luck of the draw, essentially, of who's interested in participating. And there, how many classes do you have right now in color guard, percussion, and winds? What are the classes?
So we have like our beginner, we have intermediate, advanced, premier, and then we just have an one that would be exhibition only. That would just be for people who are interested in participating but not competing. And then for winter winds, we have 2 classifications. So essentially like a beginner and an open class, or a line class and an open class. And I believe percussion is the same this year. If not, it would be beginner, intermediate, open. And I'm wondering with the judges, is it something that we can expect if, let's say, we are in a class that we might not be suited for a judge to make a recommendation to potentially move up or down a class?
I can speak to that for what we do at the Atlantic Indoor Association. We have a number that a team, if they exceed that number, and 3 of the 5 judges also exceed that number, we move them up to another class. So if they demonstrate that they are ahead of the curve significantly with the other teams, like if there's a ton of neighbors near that top area, we'll make an assessment on video. We have a team that looks at that, an advisory board for percussion, guard, and winds that make these determinations before the next show. And we understand there are a lot of challenges. We have 200 units in our circuit. So big, we've had to split it into north and south. So schedules can change dramatically based on what class you're in. We understand those logistical challenges exist, so we don't want to move anybody capriciously. Does your circuit have a mechanism like that to assess whether somebody's misclassified?
Not yet, and that's something that we're looking at. And I guess a follow-up to that, now I'm monopolizing all the time, but I'm just wondering if there is a certain amount of times, let's say within WGI, that you could move up or down a class. Is it if you move up, then you are staying within that classification, and
Yeah,
you would remain for the rest of?
yeah. In WGI, you would move down between the year. If you didn't, you could move down if you didn't make semifinals in the class, and then during the year you would only get bumped up once, but it is based off of a pretty rigorous like reclassification system, because they hope that if you move up, you would be able to be like mid-range successful in the next class. The same thing of what you do at Mid-Atlantic is similar to what we do at MEPA. Keith and I are both on the reclassification committee, and it's the same. We hit a number, and I think it is a challenge if the numbers aren't necessarily consistent from show to show or week to week. And I think it's also more of a challenge because it's a little harder to be not biased, since you guys are all so interconnected and have so many groups in all the different classes and all the different winds, percussion, and color guard. And I think that could maybe be like an outsourcing thing potentially that could be discussed. And that's also something that, you know, people could help look at the first show to kind of set the pulse and see where the rest of the circuit is relative to one another.
There are some circuits that have what are called a sorting hat show, where you get together in the first 2 weeks and the judges classify you themselves.
Gryffindor.
Slytherin.
Thank you so much.
I can assure you that whatever question you have, someone else has that same question. So don't stop asking.
Can you speak about the value of a 10th?
Absolutely. There are some ranges of between numbers that indicate, that actually send a message. And we consider the value of a 10th in the subclasses. So in equipment, if you are equal to or up to 0.3 away from a competitor in vocabulary, that means you are essentially equivalent. It means at a different show location, at a different place in the performance, you could in fact switch places with that other unit. If you are 4 to 6 tenths away, then there are minor differences that make your units stand apart from one another. And if you are 0.7 to 0.9 away, there are significant differences that separate you.
In percussion, it's smaller, 1 to 2%, 3 to 4%, and they exist on the sheet. Oh, okay, let's go back. Oh, no, it's not going to do it. Well, they're at the bottom of the sheet. Those ranges exist as tools for your benefit at the bottom of the placemats.
Yeah, and there really wouldn't be a time, and correct me if I'm wrong, but WGI isn't even using the half 10th.
No, the half 10th. So in WGI shows, people perform in rounds, and in a round of 10 to 12, we should as judges have the tools necessary to, like, there's a lot of numbers available, and with 10 to 12 units, we shouldn't need a half 10th. A half 10th is an emergency measure. Something has gone wrong, and in today's system, if you use competition suite, you can go back and move people around. There's really no need to use a half 10th in the modern environment.
Yeah, especially just making sure that the judging community understands the spread and how important that is, because I think sometimes when looking at recaps, one judge may really use large spreads and skew the overall average for a group.
Now, it doesn't sound like your circuit is large enough to warrant this, but you should be aware that in large rounds, like at semifinals, there's rounds of 24. And we are allowed to tie people in subcaptions in large rounds. The tie in a subcaption is no longer considered forbidden in large rounds.
Yes, and they would definitely not need to use that here.
No. But if you travel outside of the circuit, I just want you to be aware that it exists.
Maybe I had a different question. Maybe first, thinking about wins groups, and it's sort of newer to the circuits, but what are the main things that you see with wins groups as you're judging them? Like what should either designers or instructors really be thinking about as they're getting into this concept of wins programs? Just for background, I think this year we will have 4 winds programs in our circuit.
Well, the sheets are pretty clear that we don't value anything different than Bands of America does. The sonority of the ensemble is a primary concern to everybody. Because it's just winds. We don't have, like, you know, the taped portion of it gives you an opportunity for pulse control, and we don't judge that. All we judge is the winds portion of it. So create the best sound, right? Balance, blend, pitch, and quality of sound. Those are always the 4 things that are foremost in our mind. I mean, we will talk about articulation, we will talk about breath support, we'll talk about dynamic range, but the sound you create is the identity of your ensemble.
And then how do you think design, like, what are some thoughts as you think of the design captions, like with winds and thoughts that you have as people are designing these types of shows?
Well, as with any part of the pageantry arts, the purposeful use of design elements is going to make you more successful than if you had moments of what Keith called irrelevance. We want to see a show that has a plan, that has an identity, that has an idea of who it is as you move through the show. We should have introductions to sections. We should have clear transitions between them. There should be a build to a climax, and then a thoughtful transition into the next area. The way you connect things is more important than you think. I mean, the design analysis caption has a bullet point for that. It's so important. And in winds, we only have we have fewer judges. So consider that with more points available to each judge, the identity you create is even more important. And Carl Lowe wrote this paper about stylistic identity a couple of years ago. You remember that, Keith?
It may still be on the WGI website. Oh, hey, Kent, would you talk about pacing for a moment?
Sure. Pacing is primarily a general effect comment, but it's like the hills and valleys of a composition. If your piece starts out soft, within the first 45 seconds, you should get loud. If it's thin in texture, then it should become thick in texture at some point. These gradations are where the points live. And we know that more specifically in dynamics, in the winds and percussion portion. But it's true of orchestration as well. You don't want to over orchestrate. Everybody plays all the time. There's no variety in that. As you pace something, consider Star Wars. It starts off with a kid on a desert planet. And then there's an emotional heft as his aunt and uncle die. And then it dies down for a little bit. And then he goes into space. And it's a terrifying world out there. He gets on a Death Star, and the stakes are even higher when his mentor dies. And then it dies down again. And at the end, the Death Star blows up. So it looks like hills and valleys. And you should not forget that the intimate moments in between the events are equally important. In fact, that's one of the places you can have the most artistic work of your show, is in those more intimate moments.
It's not fair that I knew where that conversation would go exactly, but he's exactly right. There's those intimate moments where you'll find some of the strongest reactions. When you isolate the focus to just a few performers, we're forced as an audience to lean in. When you can craft a moment between 2 individuals, that is incredibly powerful. It's why Marvel is doing better than DC in the movies, because in Marvel, it's a relationship between Captain America and Iron Man, or Wanda and Vision. And in DC, everything threatens the destruction of the universe, and we can't sustain interest in that. I'm being real serious. I'm going to ask that if you really want to talk well about pacing, you should watch a video from a game design series called Extra Credits.
I'm going to get the link.
Put it in the chat.
Yeah.
This we tell it to everybody, because it's not just about how to design a game. It's about how to pace something to keep people's interest. And in the color guard world, we've been talking about pacing for a long time, about how frequent your impact points should be, about how to change texture, like in the winds realm, changing the texture by combining different instrumentation groups. So the combinations that you use are important. Variety is important. I do want to follow up one thing Kent said, and that's about transitions. For the design analysis sheet, the events are the transitions. A lot of designers want to come into a space and then start doing their thing. Well, the coming into the space is the thing for the design analysis judge. We don't see you. We don't see your design as a light switch on and off. We see every time you move through space as a critical connection to what came before it and what comes after it. In fact, on the effect sheet, that's how you maintain that acceleration upwards to the next impact point, is by connecting effects. As soon as you rush to the edge of the stage to change equipment, you've lost us. Now you have to start from ground zero and developing interest again. So Kent has placed the video link for that extra credits pacing video in the chat.
I just clicked
And
it.
to be clear, this video is about video game design. These people are video game designers who made this, but it is absolutely applicable to what we think of as pacing as well.
And sometimes it's not like that the movement from main event to main event is the problem, but perhaps it's like how you chose to stagger the leaving, stagger the arrival, how you can use layering and different groups of humans to move from place to place versus doing it all at one time.
Heather knows all the secrets.
Yeah, and I think sometimes, because I get to dabble in the drill world in AMAA with groups, and I absolutely adore it. And I feel like sometimes I box myself into being too symmetrical, and I think that like I like to have the whole show before I even start the beginning, so I know where I'm going and I know where my equipment transitions are going to be and where I'm going to have soloists and duets, and this group is going to take the focus and this group's going to become secondary or tertiary. So I think sometimes it's not, we'll feel like it's broken, but maybe it just needs to be massaged and it's going to be fine, but you need to look at how you could craft it better.
The most frequent comment I'll say on the design analysis sheet is that there may be an absence of content to motivate motion. I'm going to always ask why. The design analysis sheet will always ask why you're moving from here to there. What is the purpose of it? And if your answer is to go get equipment, it's not a great answer.
Throw it out.
As you build your stages, let's remember the periphery of the floor is a stage that most people don't explore.
And how you pick up that equipment can be crafted so it doesn't look so transitional.
Yeah, perform to the space, perform through the space, and perform the transition as well. It's all judgeable. And we're going to
yeah, and for like percussion and winds the same breath, it's like the performer is never off stage. And I think sometimes our performers will forget that, and that can be something that can make you look more professional and more put together right off the bat, is just being like, as you go behind the prop, as you come back out from behind the prop, as you think that you're in the back left corner and you want to adjust your pants or something. It's like speaking about those little details can change the perception of the group.
And if you don't have props, we can accept the fact that this is a stage and we know the rules of a stage. If you turn away from the audience on the periphery, we will accept that you are theatrically hidden. We can accept that you've indicated to us that you don't want to be judged right now. And that's fine. Communicate that kind of stuff with the judges.
And detail that from performer to performer.
Speak over you. There's a time maybe 12 years ago where my brother made a comment to me about judging Phantom Regiment, that they came, the brass and percussion came into every arrival point in a different foot position or a different level. And that shows real desire to create variety and it indicates planning. So as you're at your show us variety. We look for it. We want to find it.
And it doesn't have to be advanced skill variety. Like he just said, show me first position, show me second, show me a modified third. The simple things will expand your range of skills in a way that sets you apart.
And making, as a cleaning process for that, I think making sure that you take the time to like have all of the students stand in those positions and clean that position, because perhaps, especially early season, the transition to the shape could maybe not be as clean, or the form kind of breaks down. But as you arrive, you could initiate not only maybe musically or spinning wise, but like visually, there can be a lock-in point to like start the next phrase together because you took the time to clean that detail into the production.
And that compositional variety applies to everything you do. It applies to texture and orientation, distance between people, the amount of space you take up, density.
Over the last 3 years, I worked pretty hard and I became an equipment judge. I've been judging equipment for a lot of circuits for the last 3 years. And I have become a better design analysis judge because I talk about grip shifts now. And I'm telling you, it opened up a whole new world for me of complexity.
Yeah, pick up that equipment, try to do it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just remembering that you told me I could cry and critique during the summer and in the winter when I see you next. So I'm just putting that in my back pocket.
Everything's fair.
Thank you.
I'm not sure how much time we do have left, and this is just going back to that vocabulary and finding terms that I've heard, but I'm just looking for a little bit more expansion on. I'm wondering if you don't mind touching on derived achievement for me, because that's something that I've heard a lot.
Sure. There's a lot of math that we could and want to talk about in how derived achievement works, but fundamentally, we consider two things. We consider what you're doing and we consider how well you're doing it. And the relationship between them is the profile. We have some suggested profile ranges. If you, as a judge, want to say that the performers don't yet have the performance mastered, you can put the performance up to 1 full point below the design. And if you want to indicate that the performers simply had a great show, we are allowed to put the performers 0.4 points above the performance number. So do you see how the range of the performers themselves, that 1.4 difference or range around the design, might change when the design number changes? Yes? So when the design number goes up or down, it changes the range available to us for the performance number. That's really what derived achievement is. We indicate the degree of success of multiple responsibilities by considering the complexity of those responsibilities, complexity and variety of those responsibilities. Kent?
Well, we are told in the philosophy that both subcaptions are inextricably linked and must be linked in commentary. So if you find a judge that will only talk about what you're doing, or a judge that only talks about how you're doing it, they shortchange both subcaptions. So just pay attention to the balance of your commentary, not just balance positive and negative, but balance between the what and the how.
Makes sense. And is derived achievement the same like all throughout all classes? Is it the same whether you are in, let's say, an intermediate in our vocabulary, I guess, for our classification versus like a premier or advanced class? Is it the same throughout?
The classes are not different landscapes. They are bigger landscapes than you had before. Everything builds upon the previous class. You don't lose the criteria for A once you go to open. It just expands what you're available to do. So sure.
That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Every class is foundational for the next. That's what I wanted to say.
I think we probably have time for 2 more questions if anyone's got them.
I don't have to go to bed.
I'm retired. I have nothing to do. Step right music.
This is just a Wednesday night for us.
That's awesome.
You're not straining us.
I had a question sort of around the concepts of pursuing competitive success and then being focused on education. And I have some concept or conversations with peers, and they see them as not a lot of overlap. And I'm sure your opinions might differ on that. And so I'd be interested to hear your perspective on that.
I'll give you my one sentence answer is we're trying to make good people. That really, if you're trying to do something other than make good people, you're in the wrong business. We're influencing young people, and we do stand as role models for them. And so I will admit, Kent and I thrive on competition. We will turn anything into competition. But the truth is that when it comes to students and performers in our care, we're trying to grow good people.
I say it to my teams all the time. The people we make are more important than the musicians we make. We have to turn them into people that can accept artistic endeavors. So while we give a number for it, let's remember this number is in relationship to other teams, and you don't control those other teams.
Yeah, what are you really competing against? You're competing against the criteria. You should want to see your score go up. That's a success. And it's important to characterize the success of your performers in terms that are concrete. Like next week, we want to, or by the end of the season, we want this score to be higher. That's how we measure success. And we're going to applaud for the other people that we see.
Allie, what's on your mind?
I'm a sponge. I have so many notes. I'm just writing everything down.
Read through the philosophies before the placemats in the WGI rulebook. That's what somebody asked about vocabulary. All the words are in there, and especially in DA, it describes them.
And one read won't be enough. This is like if you've got a favorite book you've read multiple times, this is going to the WGI manual should be a favorite book that you read multiple times.
The two books I've read the most are the Iliad and the WGI rulebook.
That's quotable. And that's actually something I've never read is the WGI rulebook. And in conversations up here, we talk a lot about sheets and see those as that core piece that people should be reviewing. But my understanding of what you're describing in the rule book and maybe the missing piece for me and a lot of others is there's an interpretation layer that can sit but like on top of the sheets, which us as let's call them more lay people can really understand. My understanding is that's what you're describing in this book, is that it actually puts it into more organic or natural language that then we can understand what the sheets are talking about,
especially for general effect. I think it's necessary for somebody in your circuit to have the ability to talk about what the manual says about that topic.
In the same way that we want you to build a logical program in DA, there are different types of effect that we will talk about: aesthetic, intellectual, and emotional. So know how to craft those three, not just in isolation, but in combination.
I'll put out a call for anyone. If you have any last questions, feel free to put them in the chat as well if anyone has anything, or if Heather, you have anything you wanted to prompt us on.
Let me prompt Heather on something. Heather is something of a miracle worker. Can you talk about how you integrate different age groups together?
Different age groups and different skill level?
Yes.
I think finding the friends within the group that kind of have the same similar skills, like when breaking down for color guard, maybe the strongest line is like whatever weapon you might want to feature for that time, but maybe at a different time you've featured the strongest flag humans, and just knowing that like depending on how many performers you have, you can split it up into groups and create a dance line. And maybe that dance line is your weakest members, and then crafting it though so it doesn't seem so sterile, I think is super important, and doing research to find ways to make things look like they have more difficulty level, or that you put it in a ripple, or you put it in a layer, or you found a different way to go into the ground in a shape that's like rewardable, so it doesn't seem like, okay, these are my weak friends, so I'm not going to tell them where to place their arms, I'm not going to tell them what foot to step off on, but they're going to do a sit roll on count 5, and then they'll hit this tertiary shape that I've never made them hold and I've never cleaned before. So I think part of the cleaning process is like getting on the ground and doing it with them. And then part of the writing process for the different level of skills and ages would be being aware of what the opportunities and what the realistic like capabilities are of the students, and having, you know, version A for the beginning part of the season, and perhaps you're working towards a version B for a line, for a duet, for a soloist, that like could increase your difficulty and make it feel like something new and unique the next time you come on the floor.
Heather touched on something really important, is that as instructors, we're probably the most experienced people in the room with those performers, and we have to make sure that they are trained before we give them the skills that we have already mastered. We can't just, like, there's a comment that we can make as judges where we say that the performers seem to be rehearsed rather than trained. Don't just say, do it like this. Give them the foundation so that they can implement it accurately, both for the competitive success and for their safety.
Yeah, and try it yourself. And if you don't feel comfortable, have a staff member do it so that there's some tips and tricks, or even if your main performers can do something that maybe even the staff can't do because they have a special skill, it's like share the tips and tricks, figure out how to make it successful. Don't just throw them to the wolves and not discuss it at all, and then be disappointed when it doesn't work out for you.
My last question, maybe Heather, you as well. If you had one piece of advice for instructors that are working with their groups, we're preseason, coming up into the season in the next few weeks. What would be your one piece of advice?
I'm going to tell you a story. Barry Tuckwell was the principal horn of the London Symphony Orchestra, one of the most famous horn players who's ever lived. He's now conductor of St. Martin in the Fields Orchestra. And he was asked at a master class, if you had 60 minutes to prepare for a recital, what would you do with those 60 minutes? And he smiled and said, I would do scales and long tones and breathing and articulation and dynamics and triads. I would do arpeggios. I would make sure that my hand position is accurate to the bell. And the guy's like, well, when do you practice the music? He said, oh, I will have practiced everything in the music, so I'll just look through it in the last 60 seconds. The degree to which you train your kids should contain the vocabulary that's in your program.
I'm going to say the same thing in a different way. There are no advanced skills. There are only fundamental skills. Now, there are advanced situations that require a strong understanding of fundamentals, but there are only fundamental skills.
Okay, I'll go. Going off of what Kent said, I do think like from the color guard perspective, and I'm sure it also is applicable to winds and percussion, it's like, how do you technically train those skills that you want to put or have put into your show? It's like, okay, I have a traveling phrase for the whole color guard. I would make it in across the floor to a fun piece of music, and I would make it probably relative to what my show character would be, so then they could start performing it in a smaller setting while working on those skills. Same with if I had a really hard flag phrase or a hard weapon thing, I would focus on that in technique, and I would do it like 5 to 10 times early season, because there's only so much time that you have to take full out reps, and I would maybe take 8 counts into it and the 8 counts out of it. But I also think making sure your performers comprehend how to perform and don't get into that headspace of when they make a mistake, they're going to shrink into their turtle shell is super important, especially early season, because I think a lot of people, I was teaching a really strong high school here, and I was like, when do you guys like start performing? And their response to me was, oh, well, when we feel confident with the work. And I was like, well, I don't know that you're ever going to feel confident with the work, especially let alone when you have the stress of like circuit champs or anything above of WGI regional, whatever it might be. Anytime you're in front of people, you're probably not going to feel comfortable. So one, finding opportunities to get people in front of them, whether that's other groups or their parents or friends or whoever that might be. I think, or even like small section runs for each other would be super important to kind of put the vulnerability on display super early would be helpful early season. But like stressing performance, showing them how to look, showing them to roll, telling them to roll their shoulders back and having a sense of pride before they even start could be a great start to how to feel confident. And again, just like displaying it to your performer how you would like them to look. Being vulnerable in front of them will help them become more vulnerable in front of you and in front of the audience and judges.
I love how you spoke about mistakes. You know, the arts is something different. Kids are learning that mistakes are an irreparable harm. They fail on a math test, they don't get another chance. They made a mistake and it's a red mark and they'll carry that the rest of their lives. In the arts, you always get another chance, whether it's tomorrow or the next year. There is no mistake. There's merely a different kind of experience.
Well, that is a great note to end on, Kent. And so really appreciate you, Keith and Kent and Heather, for taking the time. We're excited. We have a few sessions coming up over the next few weeks with our judges, as well another one with our instructors, and we'll do a good job of communicating to them how valuable these sessions are and the great conversation that we had here tonight. So just wanted to say thank you very much from us up here in Canada, and we're looking forward to more sessions together over the next few weeks.
We'll see you next Wednesday.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye.